So here I am, 16 years old, riding the train, listening to Phil Collins' big band CD on my Discman. I was a very cool teenager. Okay, we have a busy day because we're going to go through A Hot Night in Paris, the Phil Collins big band record. We're going to talk about it track by track. We're going to talk about the origins of this record. We're going to talk about the sound. There's so much to talk about because I want to talk about the documentary as well. So there's just a lot I want to go through. I'm a huge fan. You're not going to hear me say anything bad about this record. I think it's fantastic. It got slagged off in the press big time. I was looking at some of the reviews back in 1999 when it came out. And I think that just had a lot to do with the guitar bands at the time and grunge and the advent of like pop, like boy band pop and urban pop. And I just don't think, we've talked about this many, many times about why Dance Into the Light and even Both Sides and even Tarzan wasn't really, critically admired as it should be. And I think a sound like the big band would do better today. As you look at Michael Bublé and Adele and proper music is more respected later in the 2000s than it was in the late 90s, which is a shame. I think people were looking for just more rock bands, more edge, which is mysterious why Calling All Stations didn't work, but that's for another day. If you haven't already, I really suggest you check out the documentary on YouTube. So let's go back to the origins. Okay, so this record came out in 1999. It was recorded in 1998. Basically, Phil is just moved to Switzerland at the time, and the head of the jazz festival, the Montreux Jazz Festival,
Today, Junior,
had invited Phil to perform. He had just left Genesis. It was after Both Sides. It was before Dance Into the Light. This was 1996. And he was invited to perform. And so he suggested, what about if we do a big band? Because it's something he had always admired, Count Basie. And it's just a genre of music he's always been into. And you can hear even, in a lot of the Motown sounds that he did early in his career. And so it made a lot of sense. It was something that he wanted to do. And the festival was glad to have him because he knew that he had kind of gone in that Brand X experimental jazz sound before. And so it made a lot of sense for him to do that. So he's now coming up with this idea for the big band. So they do Royal Albert Hall, which is in the documentary. You see them put this album or this set together. They do Royal Albert Hall for Nelson Mandela and the Queen and the Prince. They do the Jazz Festival in Switzerland. And I think they do a few other gigs. They also bring on Quincy Jones as the director, which is a huge deal. Or as the conductor, sorry, and then they bring in Tony Bennett to sing.
I'll get Tony Bennett to sing.
Which I'm not crazy about. Like, I don't need to hear just like a jazz band or a big band doing, standards. It's the Phil Collins and the Genesis songs reworked that I think are fantastic. So you really do have to check out this documentary because what we see in this documentary is basically Phil says to Harry Kim, his longtime trumpet player, he tells him to go and to work with musicians and to take some of Phil's catalog and to rework it into big band versions. And so I want to just say the overarching thing about A Hot Night in Paris and what I like about this record so much is that there are a lot of albums. If you dig, there are a lot of Phil Collins and Genesis tribute albums where an orchestra or a jazz musician will cover the songs. And what ends up happening is it's usually in the same key, the same tempo, but the only thing that's really different from the album, aside from just a different instrumentation, is that one instrument will take the vocal melody instead of a vocalist. Although even in the case of like the Royal Philharmonic, who did a Genesis record in the mid 90s, they would still had a choir just singing the songs. And so there's just a lot of records that are kind of on the nose, like cover versions. They almost just sound like fancier karaoke versions. Even Daryl Strumer's record that he does, A Different Side of Genesis, I love that record. Beautiful percussion on that record. Beautiful nylon string guitar playing, some really cool versions of songs like Throwing It All Away, but there's still tunes where the guitar is just playing the vocal melody. What I love about A Hot Night in Paris and praise and glory to Harry Kim is that there's a lot of these classic songs that are not immediately recognizable. I would say Invisible Touch and Sussudio are not immediately recognizable. It's not the exact song just with a trumpet playing the vocal melody, which I think is really important. And that's what gives this record so much depth. And this is what, because there were so many Phil Collins tribute records at the time, and there still are, they're easy to find on Spotify. This is what makes this stand out. This is what makes this a better record. It's because it's true big band music. It's taken from the source and then arranged properly. Somebody really took a lot of time in coming up with the arrangements for this record. That's what I love about this record so much. And if you haven't listened to it in a while, you really should dig it out. It sounds great on the 2016 or 2019 vinyl reissues. It's remastered at Abbey Road by Nick Davis. So I guess, and you know, honestly, if you guys could help fill in the gaps here a little bit, because from what I understand is that he puts this band together in 96 for a couple of special shows that involved Tony Bennett as well as Quincy Jones as the conductor. And then they kind of disband, and then they get back together in 98 and do a US tour, I believe. And then that's where the recordings, maybe maybe a Europe tour. Then they get back together in 98. I think they do a Europe tour with the big band, and that's where they record this record, which comes out in 99. So fill in the gaps for me. I couldn't really find the information. I know they do this band as like a special project. Then they release Dance Into the Light, and then he goes on tour. And then after the Dance Into the Light tour, he goes back on tour with these guys. Can you fill in those gaps for me? If any of you in our viewers saw the Phil Collins Big Band, please leave a description in the comments. I'm so curious. Another thing I couldn't really find too much is that when they did the show in 96, there was some songs that are not on this album. So In the Air Tonight, it was something that they played a lot. Two Hearts is something you hear in the documentary. I think another, issue I have, there's 3 covers on here. There's Pick Up the Pieces, Milestones, which I believe is Miles Davis, and then Chips and Salsa, which is kind of like a classic Latin Brazilian tune. And then there's some Genesis songs, which are really great on here, and some Phil Collins songs. But it's a shame that we're kind of missing some surprising songs that are missing on here. Now, remember, all of these songs, because they're big band, they're jazz tunes, they're long songs. So this is a double disc already. There's not too much more they could fit on here. But I'm very curious why we didn't hear anything from Dance Into the Light, because Dance Into the Light is such a horn-based record. I would really like to hear it kind of reworked into a big band sound. Maybe those songs are already too big band sounding, but Dance Into the Light could have been cool, or Wear My Hat, or something a little bit more from left field, like Lorenzo could have been really cool. And I know that this was originally put together and the arrangements were done before Dance Into the Light. So I understand that. But even stuff from But Seriously, there's nothing from But Seriously on here. So that would have been kind of cool. And it's interesting, right? He does anything that is not obviously Motown inspired. So you don't hear Behind the Lines on here. You don't hear It Don't Matter to Me. You don't hear I Missed Again. Anything that already had a bit of that jazzy American big band sound. We hear stuff like I Don't Care Anymore and Against All Odds and the Los Endos Suite, which is fantastic. Sussudio, That's All. So it seems almost intentional that we don't have any of his horn-based stuff like Something Happened on the Way to Heaven or Hanging Long Enough or the songs I mentioned off of Face Value or anything from Dance. But this is still a fantastic album. The depth of this record is incredible. Let's go track by track real quick. By the way, the engineering and the recording of this is fantastic. I mean, it was essentially his last live album, right? We never got anything from the Dance Into the Light tour, which is a shame. We never got anything from the Final Farewell tour other than the DVDs. But the sound is really, really good. I just love listening to this record on vinyl. I mean, dinner party music too. It's great. There's no singing on this record. So it's really nice. You could put this, if you're like a closeted Phil Collins fan, you could put this on at a dinner party and people just think you're sophisticated. But secretly, you're listening to Phil Collins.
I love Tony Bennett.
The record's 70 minutes long. Oh my gosh. That's like pushing the limits of a CD. It's so interesting too how this guy was just printing money, like Dance Into the Light and then the Greatest Hits package that we talked about a couple of weeks ago and then this record and then Tarzan right after it. Like it was just like one incredible release after another. The late 90s are so overlooked for Phil Collins. What a shame. So Sussudio is great. Probably one of my favorite tunes on here. It's very clearly Sussudio. Because Sussudio is horn-based. That kind of goes against what I said earlier, but I really like the version of Sussudio in here. It's probably, aside from maybe That's All and Against All Odds, it's like the closest sounding to the original, but still really, really good. I mean, this was an interesting record. I picked this record up, I think in late 99 or early 2000. I was a little bit late. I think I maybe got the CD used. I didn't think as a teenager I would be into it, but I really did like it. And I think looking back, I was also actually listening to Diana Krall at the time. I'm a big Diana Krall fan. And I think this record kind of got me into jazz. I really like jazz. I don't listen to a lot of big band. I listen to new jazz. I listen to experimental jazz fusion I really like. But I think this was kind of formative for me, like to experience other music that wasn't pop and rock. That's All is probably one of the greatest songs. And I think when you hear what Harry Kim did it to it and the da 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 da, it really makes you feel like That's All was originally written for big band. That's what I think is so great about this version is that, yes, it's obviously the Genesis song That's All, but just the way it's performed makes you think, wait a second, is this a big band standard? And the way it goes down too, for that, the bridge, the doom, 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 which I think might be an upright bass solo on this track. Again, Invisible Touch, track 3. What's so cool about it, and I think there's other tunes I would have preferred to hear instead of it, but what I like about Invisible Touch is he had to obviously do some big numbers that people would like, but it's super slowed down. It's way more jazzy. It's it's just like having a smoke and a whiskey in a club. Like it's just
This is a jazz club, yeah?
Yeah?
And I think if anybody else were to cover Invisible Touch, and there are versions of Invisible Touch out there, jazz versions and jazz fusion versions of Invisible Touch that have been done, and orchestra versions, they're just so on the nose. They just are, they're closer in tempo, they're closer in melody. And that's what I really like about this version of Invisible Touch. It's just way more laid back and less recognizable. That's what I really appreciate about some of these songs. And actually what I don't like about Against All Odds, which we'll get to. So Chips and Salsa is a standard, and I don't know Phil's connection to it or why they picked it. I think it was probably important to fill out a set with more big band standards and jazz standards, songs that would be relevant to, because imagine some of the people coming out to this wouldn't just be Phil Collins fans. There might be some primarily jazz or big band fans. And so for them to hear some classics, like Pick Up the Pieces, it was a great version. So I have no problem with Chips and Salsa. I think from an album standpoint, though, I mean, I know that they did Two Hearts on this tour. I know they did In the Air Tonight. I'm surprised those didn't make the record. Maybe they just weren't as exciting enough. And I think if you're trying to put this on at a dinner party, again, we don't want it to just be like a cheesy sax version of a popular Phil Collins song. We want it to be a great big band record to stand on its own. So I think that's probably why we hear some of these standards like Pick Up the Pieces and Chips and Salsa. Now I will, with Hold on My Heart, I will go against what I said about, not liking the kind of the more on the nose covers, because Hold on My Heart is beautiful. And I think it's because, and I'm going to contrast it with Against All Odds, because I don't like the version of Against All Odds on this record, although it has 10 million plays. So I'm thinking that it might be on like hotel lobby playlists or something, because it's like just a nice version of Against All Odds. We'll talk about that in a second. But I do like the Hold on My Heart version. I love Hold on My Heart. It's my favorite Genesis ballad, one of my favorite Phil Collins ballads, let's be honest. But it's played with a muted trumpet. And it's the problem with Against All Odds is the solo is done by a saxophone, which just sounds a lot like the original Against All Odds, whereas Hold on My Heart doesn't have a muted trumpet in it. So that's why I like this version a lot. And again, like there's just a lot of improvisation or a lot of kind of veering off from the album version. So there's moments where you are totally taken out of the fact that this is a track from We Can't Dance. Like it just sounds like you are watching a great jazz band play. I Don't Care Anymore. I'm not a huge I Don't Care Anymore fan, the original, but I Don't Care Anymore on this. I didn't show you the track listing here. Sorry about that. Can you see that okay? I Don't Care Anymore is probably my least favorite song on this record. And I think that has to do not just with the original song I'm not too crazy about. Is it just that this type of jazz is kind of like this type of Pink Panther jazz I'm not really into. I don't mind big band. There's a lot about jazz that I like. And then there's some parts of jazz that I don't like. And whatever this style of jazz is that I Don't Care Anymore is, and you should be, by the way, when you're watching this video, I can't play any clips here for copyright purposes, but you should be listening along on a Spotify playlist or put the CD on if you have it. Because, some of these are hard to remember what they sound like, because the melody of these songs, the original songs, are present in these big band versions. Maybe that's why I Don't Care Anymore, because I don't think that the hook is a great melody. I'm not, just personally. Milestones is probably one of my least favorites. I'm not too familiar with that song. It's a Miles Davis song, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not to me, it's not that exciting from a drum standpoint. It's not that exciting. Phil playing the big band drums on all these tunes is awesome. But yeah, this song kind of just brings it down for me. 6 minutes. I probably would have preferred something a little bit more from out of left field, something like Find a Way to My Heart could have been cool, or Thunder and Lightning, or if you're going to do a slow tune, maybe Don't Let Them Steal Your Heart Away, or If Leaving Me Is Easy could have been really, really cool. I think as the song Milestones gets bigger though, towards the end, you realize like they're trying to impress jazz fans in the audience. They're trying to show everybody in the band's jazz chops. And I think that's probably the purpose on this record, is that if they're trying to make a great jazz record. And it entered the Billboard charts at number 3 on the jazz albums charts, which is a really good accomplishment. I don't think it was nominated for a Grammy. The Against All Odds version on here, I think it would have been nice. Yeah, it's hard, right? Because I think when you're putting a record together like this, you're trying to do stuff like Milestones and pick up the pieces for jazz fans, but you're also trying to do really classic Phil Collins songs, and you don't get much bigger than Against All Odds. So I kind of understand why it has to be on here, but it is just a sax solo. So I think the song is great. I have no problems with Against All Odds. I think this version is great. It has 10 million plays on Spotify already. So people love this song, and this version is absolutely fine, but it is just very on the nose. It's very, very close to the original in the sense that it's a sax solo, but I love sax. I love sax solos too. So I'm complaining, but I'm not, right? Pick Up the Pieces is so cool. Very, very long song, 12, almost 13 minutes. Really, really great. It makes it a fantastic side 2B, side D. Some great Brad Cole piano solos on here. Great horns on this one. Cool drums. Just a groove. Just a locked in groove. I love this tune. I'm not completely against having the covers on this record, and Pick Up the Pieces is my favorite. Probably the closest sound to the Saturday Night Live theme song.
Saturday Night Live!
So it wouldn't be a Phil Collins concert or a Phil Collins live album without a drum solo. And so you have the Los Endos suite that starts with a drum solo, as it usually did on post Trick of the Tail performances with him and Chester. Chester isn't on this tour, but Phil is playing the drums. And then I think there's another percussionist who's playing along with Phil's drum solo. I think the percussionist is the guy. You can let me know who he is. I didn't give him credit here, but I think the guy who played on, I want to say, the Final Farewell tour, definitely on the Dance into the Light tour. I don't know if it wasn't the drummer, but it was the percussionist. My apologies. Let's grab his name here. Louis Conti, if I'm saying that right. Fantastic percussionist and just beautiful percussion. On this track. My favorite thing about Los Endos, and it was incredibly beautiful on any of the post Trick of the Tail tours, is when you have this drum solo and then that melody hits, usually with the synths and the guitar. In this case, it's the horn, the da-na-na. I love how wicked fast the drum pattern is here. And if you've watched that tutorial with Nick Collins on Drumio's YouTube channel, you could see how wicked fast the drum pattern is for Los Endos. And you kind of don't think of it too much because the melody is actually playing like half notes. And so the wicked fast drumming is often overlooked, but you can hear it more on this version. That cool sound too, the do-do-do-do-do-do, played by the horn section, just again, it makes it really feel like this was originally a big band song, not originally a prog rock song from Genesis. So love this version. Really great sax solo to end it off too. So I'm curious, like, what do you think about this record? Did you pick this record up when it came out? Are you a fan of jazz or big band? I mean, maybe some of our Phil Collins and Genesis fans don't go down that road. And so maybe for you haven't checked this out or you're not a fan of this record, but let me know if you are a fan. I think it's one of his best. I mean, if I were to compare this to Going Back, I would take this over Going Back any day. I mean, you know, I'm very mean to Going Back on this channel, but this is different for me. This is different. This sounds really great. If you haven't checked out that documentary on YouTube, you can go and watch it about how the album was put together, how Phil learned these songs, even though he wrote the songs, but how he learned the big band version of the songs. I love how this album fits into this crazy timeline of both sides, Dance into the Light, and then, you know, and then this version, and then Tarzan, and then Testify. It's just interesting how towards the end of his popularity career, how we get a really cool record like this. And if I've missed any details about this album, how it came together, about the tour, I wasn't paying a lot of attention back in the late 90s. I was focusing on being a zit-faced teenager. So please fill in the gaps for me in the comments below and let me know. Thank you so much for watching, and please subscribe if you haven't already.